This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 41, Shaping the Future of the Web. Did I say it right, Jen?
I don't know.
Oh, so we have Jen Simmons here, and she's an incredible developer designer, all around web enthusiast, and we're really lucky to have her on. And our panelists today are going to be Danny Blue,
Hey, everybody.
Nick Niemeyer, and Rachel Neighbors. So, Jen, can you just, for those who don't know you, which are probably very few, can you just give us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jen Simmons. I'm a web designer. These days I've been spending a lot of my time traveling to conferences speaking. I'm speaking a lot about CSS layouts, shapes, Flexbox, stuff like that. And I have a podcast called The Web Ahead, which if people have not heard of it before, you should totally go check it out. It's called The Web Ahead.
Definitely.
I'm imagining that's where probably most people know you from, is your podcast.
Yeah, unless they're a Drupal person, they might know me from Drupal, the Drupal world.
Mm-hmm.
Or
This is true.
there are some other worlds.
Yeah, I mean, you're on in your GitHub. You're on the Chrome GitHub organization as well.
Yes, I worked with some folks over in Google, San Francisco, to Mountain View, really, to do some cool stuff. I'm probably on that repo because I was helping build the developer website for a little while.
Excellent.
Developer website. Use Flexbox on that. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, the new site that you have for the web ahead, thewebahead.net for those listening. You have some interesting work with shapes on there as well.
Yeah.
So CSS shapes.
Yeah, I designed and developed that website over the winter. I had some help with like branding and strategy, but pretty much, and some folks who really helped out a lot in doing the transcriptions and in loading the site up with content. But most of the design and the development was just me. So I built the site in Drupal and designed the whole site, did all the front end work for it, and yeah, it's interesting when you're working on a project like that and you are the client and you're the whole team. um, you can you get a chance to do things that you wouldn't necessarily do if you were working with a larger team, like a team at all. You know, if you had 12 people on something, or if the decisions have to get made by someone who's going to write the checks and they need to see prototypes or something more formal before they say yes, we want to develop it. Right, that takes you down a whole road. But when I was building that site, it was just like I could just experiment and try things out. And I pretty much started building it right away without really knowing what the information architecture design would be, or the visual design would be, or But I knew I wanted to use as much new web technology as I could in service to the design. Not go crazy with it, but find ways that I could use things that would be interesting and would be future forward or whatever. And CSS Shapes is definitely one of those things. It's super easy to use. It's not supported in half the browsers, but there's like a super simple fallback. It just falls back to a square. But otherwise, if you look at the website, you'll see anywhere there's a photo of a person, they're in a circle, and then the bio of that person, instead of sort of going around that circle in a square-shaped text blob, it goes around in a circular-shaped text blob. It's really nice.
That's cool.
The shapes is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So it doesn't break. It doesn't completely break in browsers that don't support it. So graceful degradation.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole principle behind progressive enhancement, and it works because if CSS doesn't understand a line of code, it just goes, I don't know what that is, you misspelled something, whatever, moving on. And it just ignores that line of code and it keeps going. So you can write new code in a document, in a CSS file, even when one or more of the browsers won't understand it, because they'll just ignore it. They don't freak out, they don't shut down, they don't stop rendering the page. They just go, whatever, I don't understand that, and they keep going. Doesn't even slow them down. So you're fine in something like IE or Firefox because it just draws a square. And then you can use it in Chrome or Safari for iOS, which is a huge. Honestly, for the web ahead, Chrome and iOS Safari are like 80 or 90% of the audience together. IE and Firefox have very small, tiny market shares for and Android. Like, so most people get to see the shapes, and then the people who don't get to see the shapes, they don't see the shapes. Not until at least later versions of Spartan and Firefox. I'm sure will support shapes, but I'm not sure when.
So are you using Flexbox for the new site as well, for the new web ahead site?
I'm not using Flexbox for the whole page layout. I'm using old school floats and negative margins and things.
Okay.
But for there's some little details that I'm using Flexbox on. So, like places where there's a list of related episodes
Okay.
or related, like, oh, this show is filed under these topics. Because one of the cool things about the new site is that you can go find older episodes by topic, which you couldn't do on the 5x5 website. The show has been on the 5x5 network for 3.5 years. It's still on the 5x5 website, but the new website for the show, the webahead.net, has a lot more, there's a lot more stuff you can do. And one of them is you can say, I want to look at all the shows about CSS. I want to look at all the shows about performance. I want to look at all the shows about responsive web design. And you can click on an icon and you get a list of those shows. So any place, like on an episode page for a particular show, there's a little, like, filed under the things that we've been using for categories and blogging forever. And there's a little icon, because I have icons for each category, or topic, as I call them. And then the way that those are laid out is using Flexbox. So instead of, like, if one category or one topic has a long name and the other topic has a short name, instead of those being top-aligned and sort of sitting side by side, with the first line of text being the same height or the same in space at the same vertical alignment, and then the one that has extra words wrapping and like being taller but below things, they are, instead of being top aligned, they're like center aligned, so that if one of them is wrapped and has 3 lines of text and the other one has 1 line of text, then it's actually the middle of the long one that lines up with the short one. Or if it's 2 lines and 1 line, then the 1 line one lines up like halfway between the 2 line one. This is so hard to explain in writing.
I was about to say, it's got to be tough being like, I know what it looks like, but that's one of the really good things about Flexbox, that anybody that's ever taken in a design and see, whenever you get a design in from a designer, you do it, whatever, and you're like, I really want this to be middle aligned vertically, and then you just hear the front end dev or you groan because you have to, absolute positionings and negative margins and that kind of stuff just to get it to work. So did you have to polyfill anything for Flexbox to get that to work, or is it laid out in a way that it still reacts appropriately in browsers that don't support Flexbox?
I didn't use any polyfills. I don't really believe in using JavaScript for layout. I avoid it at all costs, always. I don't remember that particular thing. It may just be that they kind of get no layout if they don't understand, if browsers don't understand Flexbox, in which case maybe they're just stacked on top of each other vertically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It probably doesn't look that great, but it's probably not also really not that broken. I did a pretty terrible job, honestly, of supporting, say, IE 6 or 7. And it's not because I don't know how to, because I totally know how to write really beautiful, properly organized, progressively enhanced CSS. I just didn't do that on this project.
I mean, and why you said so yourself? 80 to 90% of your audience is using Chrome or mobile Safari anyway. So why would you? I was on a project and I almost, it was a mobile web project, and I almost got to use Flexbox, except then at the very end they tacked on Windows Phone as one of the mobile browsers they needed to support, which does not support Flexbox.
Yeah.
Well, the new ones will, though, to that.
Well, yeah, but the current ones don't. It doesn't work right now.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think there's ways to use progressive enhancement. You just have to be smart in the way you architect the code. If you're smart about it and you plan it properly, you can totally use these new things right now. It's just a matter of writing really good code and taking that time to stack it properly.
The crazy thing is Flexbox is almost there for support that you can just ignore everything else. It's like 93% or something if you have WebKit prefixes in. So it's just the slightly older IEs that are really holding that back.
Well, even IE10, you have to fix up a little with prefixes as well.
Yeah, but 11's free and clear.
Yeah.
And then there's also two. Now we're just spinning off and talking about Flexbox, but there are also multiple syntaxes for Flexbox, right?
Yeah.
Like I think IE9 supports the 2012 syntax of Flexbox, which
I'm
is
only talking the new stuff. Forget the
okay.
old stuff.
Yeah, I
Easy
that's
for
where
you
I
to
like-
say.
That's where I like using something like Sass and auto prefixer, because then you can just write normal CSS in your Sass files, and auto prefixer can like worry about what the latest state of this and that is and do things that I don't want to have to bother to do.
One of the things I loved about your show, Jen, not to veer off from Flexbox, which is awesome, but one of the things I really loved about your show was two of the things actually was the topics that you covered were not covered by any other podcast that I had heard, such as accessibility and also offline support, and you really push it where you're like you ask a lot of really good questions to get this information that people designers and developers need to know when they're thinking about all these different platforms, and I think that covers like that's kind of for me the summary of your show is that this is for designers and developers to to understand how they can build applications for everyone moving forward and using these technologies that will work in the future. So looking back, I mean, how did you come to this place from like when you started way back in '96, I think, right?
Yeah. No, thank you. Thanks. I mean, I really try with the show to make a show that works for anyone who either currently makes websites for a living or aspires to in the future make websites for a living. Like, it's not really a show for just random people off the street. I do assume that people are either professionals or they're students, but I do not assume that they're developers, and I don't assume that they're even designers. I want like CTOs and CDOs and other C-level executives to listen to the show. I want product managers. I mean, have you ever worked on a project where the product manager has the ability to make all these calls and decisions about what will and will not get built and set the priorities for the team, and yet they don't understand the web at all? Like, they have no idea what's going on with the medium.
Never, ever.
It's a problem. I mean, it's a problem when the product manager is like complaining about the amount of bold that Chrome has and wants you to fix that, and you're like, yeah, but I can't rewrite the browser. Like, can you please instead look at the hover links and the fact that we don't have one specified and tell us what that color, these things that it's a struggle when you're working with people who aren't really designing and planning and making decisions for the web when they're thinking about PDFs or print or I don't know, whatever.
always involve technology early.
Yeah, I mean, I want all these things. Like, a developer's not going to get a chance to use application cache and write some awesome code that, does an offline website if no one above them, no one who's making decisions for the business, has any idea that's possible. So my goal is to always bring sort of like news about the web, about what the web is, what the web has become, how things are changing, and bring that to the entire team, everyone who's involved in making a website. Because I think it makes everybody smarter, and I think it makes everybody able to make a better site, better product, better whatever they're working on project. Yeah, so how did I get to that place? I mean, a lot of it is the people that I've learned from and the folks that I'm inspired by, and I feel like we're all carrying the same torch for progressive enhancement, for really understanding the web as a new medium, as its own medium, and that it's not a dumb echo of an attempt to do something that the real programmers are using. Java and C++, and the web is bad because it's not as good as that stuff, or the web is a bad way to put brochures online. Really, it's just another form of print, or it's just another form of television, or it's another form of radio. Like, it's not any of those things. It's its own medium that learns from all those things and pulls from all those separate other mediums and traditions and histories, but it is its own thing. And if anybody is going to make great work, they really need to understand the medium that they're working in. Uh, and I
That
think
absolutely
progressive
makes
enhancement
sense.
is part of it. I think accessibility is part of it. Like the web by default, if you just make HTML, it's accessible. Like if you break it when you add CSS and JavaScript and you make it not accessible. Like you did something, it would have been okay, and you messed it up. So
Time to patch it.
yeah, don't do that. Like okay, why did you do that? Oh, you did that because you think that's how you're supposed to do it. Well, you're not. Like let's talk about this. Let's get into the way to think about the web and to think about good progressive enhancements, creating a good stack, good fallbacks, good yeah.
That absolutely makes sense. It's the same way where sometimes people try to take, so for example, doing mobile web stuff, sometimes people want to replicate exactly what you can do on iOS and Android natively and reproduce that on web, which is, I mean, same way going from desktop to a web app. And sometimes it's just better to look at what you have to work with, and what it's good at, not trying to shoehorn in things that don't, not trying to trying not to shoehorn in things that don't necessarily need to be there. I mean, accessibility, I think, is a really good example. Like you said, when you write just HTML, it's already accessible, and we've talked about accessibility quite a bit on this show, and it all starts at, like, if you can use a link for something, use a link. If you can use a button for something, use a button.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to worry about ARIA and all this other stuff, which is great that it's out there, but if you have a link, it's going to behave with the keyboard the way that a link behaves. You don't have to trick the browser into behaving that way.
Yeah, I should say if you write good HTML, if you write really good quality semantic HTML, then it's accessible by default. Yeah, if you write spans everywhere instead of buttons, then
Yeah, good point.
This becomes a very interesting problem when we get over into things like building interactive HTML5 games. I see a lot of people using Canvas for that, but I'm still convinced that you can build games without using Canvas, at least, things that aren't first-person shooters in the browser that could have some value for people using assistive technology. So it's my dream one day to actually build something that's a game that can be used by people who are looking at the screen and not. But you can do it technically, it's just finding those right elements.
yeah. Well, back in the day, I mean, you were to write an Atari game for the Atari 2600. You had to really figure out how to manage memory, and I mean, I don't really know how many K. Somebody could look that up. How many K was on one of those cartridges? But it was a K. It was not gigabytes. So it's like it used to be that engineering something to be really smart was part of the problem that to be solved.
Do you think this gets back into that issue with the product managers who don't really know what's possible? Do you think perhaps we've gotten so specialized that the right hand doesn't quite understand what the left hand is doing, so it's like it's just not possible without Canvas?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's an argument to be made that, a game should be inside Canvas, but the thing that I think is probably driving us all crazy is watching people use Canvas to load the entire website of, like, newspaper articles to read because they want to use some JavaScript framework and they just want to ignore the HTML. They don't want to use anything on the server. They just want to send everything through JavaScript and render everything client-side. And it's just the wrong way to do the web. I mean, you might as well just use Flash. Like, take your programmers who are doing that because they used to be Flash ActionScript programmers, and that's familiar to them, and just send them back and have them do Flash instead.
We had Steve Newcomb on from Famous just just a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that he was talking about is this new thing with, I mean, Famous is a client-side framework, but talking about mixed mode with that, where their big thing is using the right tool for the right job. So if you are rendering text, just render it in DOM, because then it's SEOable and it's accessible and everything works the way that it's supposed to. And then if you have a particular thing that maybe, like some kind of crazy animation that WebGL is the thing to use, then use WebGL. But don't shoehorn everything into one. I've said shoehorn a lot this episode. Trying to put, like I said, don't render text in Canvas because then nothing can read it. Or a person can read it, but you have no idea that it's actually there.
I think we could go down this rabbit hole for a long time.
Probably. This is very dangerous.
No, I think it's a good conversation. for
Let's
sure.
talk more about Jen.
Now we had yeah, let's talk about Jen. Good idea. So have you been writing content and doing speaking all the time that since you've been doing web development, or when did you start that?
Um, I actually started teaching before I started doing web development. So I was doing some teaching of like Saturday morning art classes, high school students. Um, back, I guess the first time I was paid to do that was 95. Um, and when then was teaching for 2 years, I taught at a media arts program, another nonprofit media arts. So it was digital filmmaking. We would teach people how to build games using Flash. Digital photography, which was still fairly new at the time. All kinds of things. Magazine, how do you do a print design by that time it was clear that everybody was using digital tools to do print, so we teach them how to do magazines, and it was pretty
Quark
awesome.
Express.
And later I was teaching in college, teaching at Temple University, film production, 16 millimeter cinematography, and web, lots and lots of web stuff, video blogging class, and um, so what was the question? Like, how was I speaking? I mean, I feel like speaking for tech sort of came out of that. I wasn't teaching as much. Uh, I wasn't working as a professor anymore because it just wasn't, I couldn't really pay the bills. Uh, and just started, speaking at tech conferences. Um, and I really enjoy it a lot, so I've done it more and more. Yeah.
That's one of the great things about our community is everyone who I've met who likes to speak and talk about these things. They're so passionate. I mean, all of us included. So we really get into it. And some people, and early in my career too, I wasn't really all that keen on it. I had done theater before, and I had done a lot of speaking, but not in tech field, right? So it was very intimidating at first, and then as I started to get more comfortable with my craft, and I started learning more from other people, and realizing what I really cared about. Um, I found a voice for myself, and I can't speak for everyone else here and how they feel about it, but that's not an easy thing to get. Do you have any thoughts for people out there who are developers who may be thinking, well, I don't really know what to say. I just know how to code, or I just know how to design or do something.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be terrified. I did a lot of theater, but I was never on stage. That was the last thing in the world that I wanted. In fact, I was stage managing a show, and the cast, opening night before the theater was open, there was no one in the room except my friends, right, the people I was working with, and they wanted me to come up on stage so they could say a few words and clap and give me roses and stuff, and I was terrified. It was like 20 people, but just stepping up on the stage and having those people looking at me was just terrifying. Um,
Yeah, with theater though, it's even different for me at least. With public speaking and theater are two different skills
yeah.
because you're yourself with public speaking. When
You
when I
are?
if I get up there and I do a character like I did Tevye at one point when I was in high school, and when I got up there, I really tried to believe that I was Tevye. Like I didn't feel that scared. You know what I mean? But when it's you and you get up there and you're talking about things that matter to you, it's a whole other world.
See, and for me, it's the opposite because I have taken acting classes and had to stand up and, pretend to be somebody who I was clearly not. Uh, but it was terrifying because it was, trying to remember the words from the script and make sure I got those correct, which was that skill is very hard for me. Um, there's a lot of other stuff going on that just made it very hard. Where I feel like getting up on stage and being like, once I have my slides done, once I know the story I'm going to tell, and I know, like, I don't have to worry about the order of anything anymore because the slides are going to show me. Like, plenty of times I get up there, I'm like, wait, what comes next? And I like look down and I can see the next slide. I'm like, okay, right, that's what I need to say next. Um,
Have you ever had a failing moment where it's like, oh God,
oh yeah, I
what's
had a
happening?
kernel panic once, where like the computer just ding. I was like, okay. Yeah, many, many, many things that have gone wrong. But like this year, I was using a remote and I had my own, but they had one too, and theirs was plugged in first. So I was like, all right, I'll just use yours. and it completely failed. Like I kept pushing the button and it kept not. And it was important to me to be able to like quickly go through the slides and time them to exactly, make a joke and bam, hit the slide at the right moment. And it was failing. So I just stopped the talk. I was like, look, I need to fix this, and went and got my remote and switched it out. But I think the more I've done it, I mean, I don't know, like, what would I tell my 20-year-old self to get to the place I'm at now? I don't know. I mean, it's just years of me figuring out a lot of things that have nothing to do with tech or even public speaking, just around who I am and not being so shy and becoming older, working through all those things. But I do think also just practice. So people say this, you go to like a bar camp or you go to some sort of a like low-key conference where no one's getting paid to speak, hardly anybody who's speaking has much experience speaking at all. And all you do is just get up in front of the 20 people who are there and just tell them the stuff that you're excited about. You're not going to be a particularly fabulous public speaker like the people who keynote at South by Southwest. I mean, but don't even think about it like that. You're just getting up and sharing some stuff. And you can just build it from there. And then maybe you do plan ahead a bit more and you get better about planning ahead. And you do make slides and your slides get better. And then you realize how to construct a story and say more things in a shorter amount of time. You realize that it's not about you, it's about how well the people who are in the room are able to understand what you're trying to share with them. So then you can spend a little bit more time thinking through several different options of how you could explain this thing until you figure out, you guess which one might be the one that's easiest for them to understand it. And then you choose to use that one. And then you realize, oh yeah, I made the wrong choice. And so the next time you choose the other thing. And see if you enjoy it, Some people really enjoy it and should go for it. And some people really hate it. Don't torture yourself. I don't feel like it's a requirement, especially for developers. I mean, I feel like designers really do need to know how to get up and present their work to their client. But I don't think that developers need to be great at public speaking or explaining things in a meeting or anything. They can just write awesome code.
I think that's so true, though, because I went to art school. I didn't study, development, even though I became a developer. So I ended up doing like oil painting and sculpture and things that, they come in handy because I work with UI components, right? But it's very much like when I went there, I wanted to just draw, I wanted to paint and do these things, but a lot of the teachers, what they would teach you is how to sell your work. So it's very, very true. You have to take criticism day one. They throw everybody's work up there, and they're like, this sucks because... and you're like,
I feel like those skills would be useful to developers, though. I mean, oftentimes I've been in a meeting and there's a quiet developer in the corner, and it's like, come on, talk about that technology you're excited about using. Sell it to them.
Yeah, totally.
I'm scared. That's too public. I want to go back to my cubicle. And so, I don't know. I feel like these skills aren't just useful to designers. Designers aren't the only people who have something they need to sell the project managers and the greater team.
I think sometimes it's easier way for developers to get away with not doing it more, maybe. Because I do agree. You at least need to be able to talk to your fellow. Now we're just getting to varying degrees of social ineptitude, but you at least need to be able to talk to your coworkers about what it is you're doing. But
hopefully,
but to Jen's point, I think maybe it's like, I don't know. It's always just different, especially like if you're speaking about development. I think sometimes it might also be a little bit different. I mean, there's like some of the Google evangelists are really, really good at it, and I'm really terrible at it. So I will just watch them for the most part. But
Rob Dodson.
I was trying to go through an episode without mentioning Rob Dodson, and Eric ruined it. So, but that's fine.
But I also think that you can deconstruct. I've spent a lot of time looking at other people's talks and sort of deconstructing them and figuring out why was that talk so awesome. This person got up and explained how to use Flexbox, and this because a lot of these talks are on video, so you don't even have to go to the conference. Just Google, search for I don't know, CSS conference, Flexbox talk or something, and you'll see a whole bunch of them, and you can watch and see, oh, that person explained it really well. That person fumbled around because they were trying to do a live demo and it was failing, and at least half of the minutes in their talk were wasted with us watching them not know how to use their computer. This person
And apologizing.
did this or that or the other, yeah, and apologizing the whole time. You know, so you can kind of deconstruct it and say, I mean, much of the way you deconstruct great code. How do you write great code? Like, oh, it's a lot of figuring out, you know, trial and error and figuring out what worked and what didn't work. And I do think everybody has their own style. I've begun to realize that in some ways every talk I gave is exactly the same talk. It has exactly the same structure. But not really. You know, most people would see a bunch of talks from me and not think that at all. But I realize it. Like I have this certain kind
What
of.
is that structure? I want to know.
Yeah.
It's always like
Or is it a
15
secret?
minutes of a story about how the web is not what you think it is. Let me throw in some history to prove that point. And then, oh, let me show you what it is. And then sometimes there's code examples, sometimes there's not. But then it's 45 minutes of, or 40 minutes of like chapters of, let me show you this stuff. Okay, let me show you this stuff. Okay, let me show you this stuff.
Do you ever do any live coding in your talks?
Never. Oh, I shouldn't say never. I did 2 years ago, but not the hour-long talks. It was like an hour and a half. But I don't even think I did then either. I much prefer these days, at least, to do screen recordings of whatever it is that I would do if I were doing a live demo, so that I can focus on what I'm saying and on the pacing and making sure I'm getting through the material fast enough. And whatever demonstration, you know, like, oh, let me type the CSS for you, or let me scroll through this web page, or let me show you how this functions. Let me drag this window open and close and show you how the responsiveness works. All those things are in my talk, but they're in my talk as videos that were pre-recorded. They're not in my talk as me live doing that.
It's not a bad idea, actually.
That sounds much, much safer.
In part because I like being in Keynote, because when I'm in Keynote, the presenter display is different than what the audience sees, and I can see how much time has elapsed, what my next slides are, and I can leave notes for myself, which solves that problem of not remembering what comes next. Where when I'm doing any sort of code demo or wanting to click into live websites, I have to be in mirror. You have to mirror your displays, and there's no secret behind the scenes thing happening. So you can't see what the next slide is. There are no notes. You're like flying blind. And I could do it. I'll do it right now, but like I much prefer, and I do a much better job if that's not the case.
Maybe your talks are not really all the same. Maybe it's the process that's the same. And would you? I mean, Rachel, you've done probably as many as Jen has. Do you?
I've
what
delivered
do you think?
a lot, but I don't know that I have as many talks as Jen has. I definitely haven't delivered as many. About the presenter notes and needing like cliff notes while you're speaking.
Well, about having your own process versus having the same talk over and over.
But I think that's what Jen meant for the most part. It's not that they're specific, that they're the exact same talk, but that she instead she has this she has this chapter book approach when she's putting things together.
It's the same dramatic arc. If you've taken theater classes and you deconstruct plays, you realize that in some ways every play is the same play, right? Aristotle was like, it should have a 3-act structure, blah, 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 and then everybody writes a 3-act structure. That's what I mean. They all have the same structure.
I would agree. I tend to use the 4-act structure you commonly see in Japanese dramas, but it's because it particularly lends itself to dispersing new information. But anyway, yeah, totally. There are these tools that you do tend to keep going back to using over and over again. That's really cool. I didn't know that another speaker on the circuit was using an act structure, but I suppose a lot of them are. It is mentioned a lot in speaking books, but it's one of those things that just seems like, and you should take inspiration from the field of theater and storytelling and acting, and you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna do it my own way. But that's awesome.
But that's also how people, like from elementary school on, you start learning how to put a story together. Or some people are better at it than others, right? But that's also whether or not people are doing it on purpose. Like I said, you're obviously doing it very specifically, basing it off of a certain structure. But I bet a lot of people do similar things whether or not they know they are.
Right. And I don't mean to say I'm using Aristotle's 3-act structure, because I'm not
Right.
at all, actually. But the structure that I use, I tend to, at least the last 3 years, maybe not before that, but the last 3 years, as I spend more time really deconstructing and figuring out what I want to do for my next talk, I have realized that I've been using the same structure for a while. And you can look at, like, you look at Jeffrey Zeldman, amazing speaker, totally
Yeah.
different talks. But it's the same structure. Like, there's the Jeffrey Zeldman structure. You look at Mike Montero, who has some of the best talks in the industry. He's winning awards for the talks that he's giving. Totally inspires people. There's
There
a
are
Mike
awards for
Montero
talks?
structure. And even though his talk is totally different from one year to the next, it's the same structure as the year before. Yeah.
I can definitely see that, having seen a bunch of Jeffrey Zeltman's talks. Yeah, that's wow. That is very true.
I mean, it's very nerdy, right? So I'll be like, I love Jeremy Keith, and I'll watch his talk, and I'll be like, what's the structure he's using, and do it with that. Is there anything I want to steal? Not from the content of the talk, but from the way he structured the talk.
Well, I mean, if you want to go even nerdier, like storytelling, to me, like I've done this, like my whole life, I've always found storytelling a very very powerful way to work with things. In general, I remember more things by telling a story, and I think that's because it's ingrained in our culture. It's ingrained in who we are. Like, it transcends through cultures as well across the globe, I think. Everyone has stories, right?
Yeah. Well, it's much easier to make a point. You know, you're there to teach people something. You're there to help people do something. So it's more efficient to put together a story and be like, here's the story. Even if your story is, I'm going to show you the syntax for the code for Flexbox, there's still a story in there. You know, when I was struggling to learn CSS, and I bought a lot of different books back before really, you know, there were blog posts, but there weren't any options around videos on the web or these interactive tutorials or anything. It's just books or blog posts. I have all these books, right? And they each sort of teach in a different way. And the ones that kind of walk me through, well, we want to do this. Okay, this is what we were trying to accomplish. How about this would make sense? Let's do, oh, see how that doesn't work? That's a bad idea. Okay, well, maybe, well, this would work. No, see, that doesn't work either. Okay, well, maybe if we did it this way. Oh, yeah, look, that starts to get us to where we want it. Like, I learned so much from that, not just because of the syntax at the end that you learn towards the end of that exercise of that chapter.
So
Which
how
is
do you
the answer. But like the process of learning how to think through going down the wrong roads and making decisions
Right.
about which way to go, like that was really valuable.
So how do you?
So anyway, so it's like a story just for
sorry.
code itself. But yeah. Sorry.
No, I can relate to that totally. The as far as like keeping relevant and up to date with information, the web changes so quickly. I mean, how do you keep up, like researching these things and finding out information to put into your talks and to put on the web ahead?
Yeah. I keep up by paying attention to other people. Twitter is a big part of that. Watching people's talks that they've given, reading agendas, even, you know, now I'm going to a lot of conferences, so I see a lot of talks. But even in the years, like last year I didn't get the opportunity to speak very much at all. But I would keep up by seeing that, oh, Rachel is talking at this conference, and I didn't know, what is Rachel doing? Let me look at the video of what she talked about. Oh, she's totally into animations. Yes, I've been meaning to figure that out. I don't know what's going on. So it is about sort of being part of the community, and even as just an observer, you know, I mean, I'm clearly part of it and involved in a conversation, but I don't know that the conversation is the part that helps me keep up. I think it's the observing is the part that helps me keep up. Like, if you pay attention to Paul Irish, then you're going to learn some cool stuff. You're going to keep up with something. If you pay attention to Jeremy Keith and Mark Bolton and this person and that person, and these are the people who are, they each have a piece of the puzzle, and so if you pay attention to enough of them, then you get a bunch of pieces.
So do you think because, like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's the goal with the podcast, is for me to go out and find all those people and all those pieces and then just sort of like package them up and make it really easy. If you don't want to follow 400 people on Twitter, you just listen to the show.
Very true.
Yeah.
So do you think that it's easier for someone living in like you're in New York City. Danny and I are over in Virginia, so we're right next to DC, Rachel, you're over in Portland. Nick, you're over in Portland. So big tech communities, big design communities in some case. Like New York, I think has a good mix of both. I worked there for a while. I loved it there. Do you think that people who don't live near some metro area, do you think it's harder for them to keep up with these
No.
things?
No, I don't. I get a lot out of living in New York City. Learning about new web technology from day-to-day contact with normal human beings is not one of them. Um, it all comes through the internet. It doesn't come from people in face-to-face.
Okay.
So I could be anywhere, and I think it'd be just as easy to keep up.
So I mean, it is worth mentioning that the Web Ahead, your podcast has like 2.2 million downloads
Yeah.
at this point. One, why do you put all this stuff out there? How did that begin? Like, how did you get to this massive audience that you have, and why do it all for free?
I I'm my whole career, I feel like I believe very much in following what I like or what I am excited by, what I'm passionate about. And when am in a situation like a job or something where like I just don't like it, like I really don't like it, I just have to not do that. Um, so I met Jeffrey Zeldman one day. I knew he would. There was an event in New York. I mean, this is what New York is good for. There was an event in New York. I have been wanting to go to that event. It's an ongoing series for a long time, and so I showed up, and I expected that he'd be there, and I introduced myself to him, and very quickly, I don't usually do that, but I very quickly just started pitching who I am to him at that point, what I had done. And was talking about Drupal because I designed the default theme for Drupal 7, Bardic, which replaced Garland, which had been the theme before that. And so he was like, "Oh, Drupal, you want to be on my podcast tomorrow?" So he had me on the big web show the next day to talk about Drupal because he had a lot of questions. He was very curious about what the heck was going on with Drupal and front-end development. And Dan Benjamin was the co-host of the show at the time, and Dan really liked me and my microphone, a Heil PR40. He was like, "How do you have a Heil PR40? Why do you have a Heil PR40?" It's like, because it's awesome, and I needed to do some voiceover work for a film. So Dan invited me to be on a show he was doing at the time called The Daily Edition. And Dan Benjamin, if you don't know, he's the guy who runs the 5x5 podcast network and has many, many different shows that are very popular or have been big successes in the iTunes store. And so Dan invited me after I was a guest on that show to co-host it with him. So I co-hosted that show with him for several months. It was a daily show, so we did 37 episodes together.
Wow.
And then he moved, and he was very busy, so in expanding his business, so he stopped doing that show. Daily was too much of a commitment. But after that, Dan was like, "Hey, do you want to do another show? Would you like to do your own show?" And he offered me the opportunity to do a show on 5x5. By that time, I really loved doing podcasting. Like, I hadn't ever considered it as a medium, even though I've done film on 16mm film, I've done digital video film, movies, I've done theater, I've done print. Like, I've switched mediums many times, but I had never really, and I knew deeply I understood podcasting and had been part of the video podcasting movement when it first took off, before it was called video podcasting, before YouTube existed. There was a group of us putting video on the internet back in 2004 to 2006, 2004, 2005, 2006. So I knew all about it. I had all the technical skills to do it, but I just didn't, I was like, whatever, podcasting, man. But I loved it. I like the medium of the podcast. I like what you can do with it. I like the intimacy of it. I like the amount of work it is to do a live-to-tape show, which is what the Web Ahead is. There's very little editing, almost no editing at all. So I was excited, and I said, yes, I want to do a show, and I knew I wanted to do a show about web technology and about helping people keep up with the web. it was right as responsive web design was taking off, and HTML5 had been around for a while already, for like a year, but people were still trying to figure out what the heck was going on. So, yeah, it was great, a great opportunity. And free, I mean, podcasts are free. People aren't going to pay to download a podcast. But
have you ever? That reminds me of something. Finish your thought, but we got to come back to this.
No, ask me your question. I was just rambling.
So when you are I'm at this stage right now. You're very passionate about something. You want to give yourself wholly to it. There can be sometimes pressure to monetize in ways that might disagree with your worldview. Did anyone ever come to you and be like, yes, and you should do this to make money with your passion, and how did you feel about it? Or was that never even a question for you?
I see people sort of coming along with their snake oil and trying to sell it, and they, I don't know, 13 ways to get rich by monetizing your passions. And I don't know, I immediately know that they're full of baloney and run the other way. There have been sponsors, companies that wanted to sponsor the Web Ahead that I've just turned down flat. I've just been like, no. I much prefer to have sponsors that I really believe in, companies that I would already totally recommend to everybody, that I actually am totally telling everybody. Like Squarespace. People are like, what? Will you help me build my website? And I'm like, yes, I will help you by giving you a link. Squarespace.com. Good luck. Like I was already, so to have them sponsor, it's easy for me to endorse their. Same thing with GitTower. Like I love GitTower. I totally love them. So I reached out to them to say, hey, I would love to have you sponsor the show. I love your stuff so much. I want to have even more of a chance to talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, I do think it's a problem. I hate seeing it when people have something good and they what was good about it gets eaten away because it becomes too commercial or they get too focused on the money. I think maybe it's about risk and being willing to take a risk and say, I don't know how the money's going to work out. I'm going to do everything I can at every moment that I can to get money, but the work itself is more important, and doing great work and making something really great is more important. And that's what I've done with the show. I mean, my last client work ended in October, full-time, like a big job client work ended in October. It's now April, and I said at the end of that, I'm going to take some time off from full-time round-the-clock client work and work on the show. And so that gave me the freedom to be able to build the website, make the show better, do more episodes. And that's not going to last long. Like, I need to change that. I need to get more sponsors. I want to do memberships and have listeners contribute because I think that will help make the show sustainable. So I can keep putting more time into it and getting better interviews and getting not just the people I already know and see at conferences to talk about the stuff they're already talking about at conferences, but to like reach out to people I don't know and go wider and broader and get even deeper into the history of the web and parts of the web that many of us don't really think about much. Other communities that work on the web. But
one of the things that you talked about was your passion. You're always following what you believe in, what you want to do.
Yeah.
Is there any interesting or favorite, or even something that was really difficult that you overcame, like type of projects that you'd like to share on that?
I'm not sure what you mean. I guess nothing's popping into my head. I mean, I've worked on...
What was the most exciting project that you ever had a chance to work on?
I don't even know how to answer that question. I've probably worked on thousands of projects. For example, I did an opera about Nikola Tesla, where we traveled to Nikola Tesla's birthplace in Croatia and filmed at his house in his father's church. And then we traveled to Belgrade to do research, hired a film crew to come in on the day that the museum was shut down, and filmed all these demonstrations of his experiments and principles, the physics behind what he invented. Talked to the electrical engineers there for a week. 2 women.
That's pretty awesome.
Pretty awesome. Then
Wasn't expecting that at all.
What's that?
I said I wasn't expecting that at all. That's a pretty cool answer.
Completely random. We went back the next year and did this opera I was the projection designer along with a woman named Sarah Drury. The two of us collaborated as code designers, and we designed 7 screens. So at the premiere we had 7 screens, 4 video projectors, and everything ran like hundreds and hundreds of little clips that were controlled by computer software that we wrote, that you would trigger from a computer the next cue, and the videos would trigger on those commands. And then we took that to New York to the BAM Next Wave Festival here in New York City. So that was pretty cool. That was pretty awesome.
So I want to dive. I know we're starting to bump up. We're starting to get close to the end of our time. But we've talked about progressive enhancement and things like that. So what's a new web standard that you're particularly excited about? Like, is it, like I said, is it Flexbox? Is it something with animations? Like, what's something that's coming up that you're really excited that you'll be able to use?
I have been focused on layouts. I love CSS shapes. It's such a simple 1 or 2 or 3 lines of code, and yet it could really have a profound effect on a layout. Flexbox is great, but there's a lot there to grok, and there's a lot there to really wrap your head around. And I think we all should, and I think it could really change what web pages can do. Shapes is the kind of thing that you can learn in an hour, and there's not anything else to learn. Exclusions, it's a ways off. It's not in browsers yet, but exclusions will be pretty awesome. And I think once shapes and exclusions and shapes level 2, which is a ways off, and Flexbox and Grid are all available, I think we'll be able to do some really amazing designs. I'd like regions to go through, or if not regions, then something else. So fragmentations, or I don't know. There's 3 or 4. I gotta go. It's my research project for this summer, is to go track down what's what with all these sort of experimental layout specs.
I don't think Blink is going to be doing that one, right?
Yeah, Google implemented regions and then they yanked it out, and I don't know exactly why. It's another thing I want to go track down, is find out the real reason why. They said it's for performance reasons, but I don't know if it was, hey, the performance on this is terrible and it will always be terrible no matter what, or if it was, hey, we wrote really bad code quickly implementing this and the performance is terrible, so we're going to yank it out until we have a chance to do it right later, if we decide to do it. But there's a debate about whether or not regions is the right solution to the problem it solves. Maybe it's not. Maybe because you have to add a bunch of extra divs, it's a bad idea, blah, blah, blah. But basically what it would accomplish, or what something else might accomplish, is the chance to put several different boxes on the page and flow content into those boxes the way that PageMaker worked, or Quark, or InDesign. Because if we could do that, then we could really make some amazing layouts. You could have a sort of newspaper-style layout without the columns being, 17 times the height of the viewport, where you have to like read the first column and then scroll back up to the page and then read the second column. What we'd want is to have like a column that was maybe 80% of the height of the viewport, and you just read 3 or 4 columns of text, and then you scroll and you read 3 or 4 more columns of text and you scroll.
Chrome has columns currently implemented, doesn't it?
Yeah. It doesn't have text flow.
They have what?
It doesn't have text flow from those columns, though, right?
No, it does. I just used those.
Yeah, because I thought you can style a div or whatever it is now to say this is going to be 3 columns worth. There's going to be this much space between the columns, and just here's my text, and then it fills them all in. So like it's kind of the, I guess call it precursor to some of the advanced stuff.
That's multi-column layout, which is cool, and we should use it more. That's one of the. It's been around forever now, all of 3 years, and no one's using it. It's like, yes, let's use it. Multi-column layout, pretty awesome. But it's only good for short amounts of content, because if you have a paragraph and you want it to flow into 3 or 4 columns, cool. But if you have paragraphs and you want it to flow into 2 or 3 columns, you get that problem that I'm talking about, where, well, what if the article is 17 times the height of the viewport?
I gotcha.
Then Tim Berners-Lee actually the other day published a thing he was writing. I put the link in Twitter. I should find it and put it in the show notes. So it was like Tim Berners-Lee, and he was making an argument about something really important that I completely forget what it was. But I was so focused on the page because I was like, he used multi-column layout. Because my first thought was, why did my first thought was, who's this dummy who used a PDF, right? Because I saw the layout and I thought this was laid out in Microsoft Word and made into a PDF and put on the web, because that's just the visceral, like, you're doing it wrong. Columns. I see columns. That must be a PDF. And I'm like, oh, the dummy is Tim Berners-Lee, like the guy who invented the web. Like, clearly he understands the importance of putting his content in HTML and not in a PDF. This is not a PDF. Okay. Oh, this is multi-column layout. Yeah. So it's great because it's an example of real content that you might actually really want to read because it's important content to sort of try out what does it feel like, because the content is maybe, the page ends up being maybe twice the height of the viewport or 3 times the height of the viewport. If you're in a sort of a traditionally shaped web browsing environment, then maybe it's like 4 columns and it's double, two columns high. Of course, if the window's narrower, then it's going to be more viewports high and fewer columns.
But that's also something if you're using columns, that's a very easy switch with media queries to just say, like, okay, when you're at this size, you're this many columns wide, and when you're at this size, you're only 1 column wide. So
but
that's
even cooler. You don't have to do that because there's a thing in the because that would, right? Media queries. Okay, 600 pixels, make it 3 columns. 800 pixels, make it 4 columns. Blah blah blah. Right. But that's a little tedious. You totally don't even have to do that because in the multi-column layout, in the column spec, the code, you can just say, make my column be 200 pixels wide or 17 ems wide, and the browser knows that what you actually mean is, hey, browser, try to make this around 18 ems wide, give or take, or whatever, I guess 60 is a better line length. Like, make this column around 60 ems, but of course you're going to make it a lot longer or a lot shorter because you're going to automatically switch from 1 column to 2 columns to 3 columns to 4 columns. So you don't have to write all those media queries. You just write 1 line, and bam, it calculates everything for you.
awesome. And I'm looking at I'm looking at some docs now, and it is supported so that everybody can go out and start using it. It's supported in IE 10 and up, which is, I know, is the big one. So Chrome, Firefox, Safari, good with all that stuff. I think there's you still need some prefixes in some places, but IE 10 and up, you're pretty good.
It's
What
well
about mobile?
supported.
I'm not looking at mobile. Columns
Well,
are also
mobile-
not quite as important as mobile.
Mobile, you probably
Well,
only
you'll
want
probably want 1 column usually. Yeah.
So if you only want 1 column and the browser doesn't understand that code, ignores the code, that's what you get. You get 1 column. So like in IE9, what would you get? Instead of getting 2 columns, you just get 1 column. Like, no big deal. I used that.
Yeah.
I used multi-column layout in production in 2010.
Okay.
So
You heard it here. Let's use it.
It
I
was
have
a little,
a
it was a little sidebar widget. It was like a little list of links, but it looked weird. So it's just like, hey, if the thing is wide enough, make it be 2 columns of links. But if you don't know what that means, then it's okay. It's 1 column of links. No big deal.
All right, I wanted to know, is there any chance of an animation topic showing up on the web ahead? I know you've got CSS. I see typographies there. If typography can have its own topic, then surely animation or motion is in the future?
It should be. I think I only had 1 episode about animation. I think maybe only 1.
Only one I could find.
And so I don't really have topics for things that only have 1 show, but really I should have more shows.
Yeah.
Well, you had, for the layout, I know you had, I forgot her name, but she was doing just a small book on layouts, I think you had her on?
Rachel.
Rachel, yeah. I can't remember, though.
Rachel Andrews.
That was a very good episode, and that went into detail of all the different layouts. And then you had Sarah
Swaydon.
yes. And she's awesome. And there was some animation on there, but it was mostly talking about SVG and I think exclusions and shapes, right?
Yes. Yeah, I should have Rachel back on because things have changed a bit since
Yeah.
she was on. Yeah, she's been speaking at a lot of conferences, Rachel Andrews, about Flexbox and about grid. She's especially a huge fan of grid layout, the grid layout spec, which is still a little ways off, but it's getting closer.
Yeah, I think it's an IE and one other browser, right?
And it's probably one that, some of these things like shapes, the fallback of ignore your code is totally no big deal. If you use something like grid for layout and you do the whole page layout in grid, then what's the fallback? Like no layout whatsoever. That's a little harder to
Yeah.
live with. Or you could write the layout and then rewrite the layout and make sure that the old browsers get one version and the new browsers get the other. But writing layout code is already the hardest part of front-end development, period, and writing it twice is like, oh. So that might be a little bit, it might take us a little longer to adopt something like Grid because of the fallback is a little more painful.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We should probably wrap up. Is there anything that we need to cover that we haven't?
People should check out my show, and if they want to see thewebahead.net, and if they want to see, I'm definitely traveling a whole lot this year. I'll be at the San Francisco HTML5 user group in May.
Woo!
I'll be at an event apart in San Diego in June, in DC in August, in Chicago in August. And then I've got at least 4 or 5 more conferences booked for the fall.
Now, the one in DC is going to be in Vienna, which is nice. It's like 20 minutes from my place.
Oh yeah? Which town are you in Virginia?
Over in Reston.
I lived in Oakton for a while.
Oh no,
It's nice.
almost said bad words. Sorry.
But yeah, we'll have to see if we can come see you.
Yeah. I think tickets are on sale. You should check it out. Get a good early bird, and I think AEASIM SIM is my discount code for the year, so you can use that and get yourself a little discount.
Excellent.
And if people want to find you on Twitter, or what's the best way to catch you so that they can, learn more about you and about what you're doing and the web ahead?
Follow me on Twitter, jen-simmons, Jen with 1 N, Simmons with 2 M's. I do have a website, jen-simmons.com. There's a list of all the conferences I'm speaking at there with links and coupon codes for all of them. It's a really bad-looking website, so you can judge me and just know that I know that I should be judged because it's terrible.
You do have a disclaimer for that, though.
Yeah, and any minute now, I've been saying this for 5 years, but any minute I'm going to totally redo my website and it's going to be awesome.
That's right. Our podcast website is a template I just threw together from what they gave me, so I totally get it.
Well, and the Web Ahead website was more important, so all winter I was like, all right, I have time. Like, no, focus on one website at a time. So now that that one's done, I can focus on the other one.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Jen. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was fantastic.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Good to speak with you.